Welcome to the northeast of England. My name's Paul Isles, I'm Project Manager with Accurascale, and we're here today at Beamish Wagon Works to run over and unveil our new wagon project. So for the next wagon in our Power in Britain range, we find ourselves here at Beamish alongside a North Eastern Railway 20-tonne hopper. And it's this wagon that's going to form the basis of our new tooling suite. In this suite, we're going to be covering the P6, the P7, the P8 and the Q3 versions of this particular model, all using the same wheelbase, the same chassis, but with different bodies and different brake and journal combinations. So why the 20-tonne wagon when we've got the Chaldrons in the range? Well, the Chaldron was the genesis of the coal traffic. It was how coal was moved about in the collieries. But as we said last time, the NER weren't keen on the Chaldrons. They were expensive to maintain. They were awkward. They didn't carry enough. So the idea was to create trains that would take on the main line a greater capacity of coal. Now the problem was for the NER that they had different ideas. The NER board had been across to America and they'd seen how the Americans work their system with 40 and 60 tonne bogie hoppers. And whilst that's what the NER wanted, they couldn't do that because of the existing rail infrastructure. So what they had to do was come up with a hopper design that fell between the Chaldron and the bogie hoppers. And the 20-tonne design, the P7, was their ideal. So they had to consider what the colliery owners would accept. So the first call was to create a prototype, as with anything else. This was the P6 hopper. Essentially the same as what you see with the P7 behind me, but about 2/3 of the height, mainly so it could fit underneath the existing loading screens at the railways. Now around 1,200 of these were built just after the start of the 20th century, so about 1902. 1,200 were built, they were successful, the colliery owners were on board almost instantly. And so the NER proceeded with their plans to populate their network with other 20-tonne hoppers of the P7 and the P8 varieties. Having been introduced in 1902, the 20-tonne hopper stayed in service and with BR until the late 40s, early 50s, before they were sold on to National Coal Board use. And so eventually they would have disappeared from the collieries locally here around the mid-80s, about the time of the miners' strike, and as collieries were closed, these wagons were sent for scrap, those that were still able to run. So we've got quite a long period of time that we can model these through, right the way through the NER period with the different liveries that they carried then, through the LNER period with the changes that were made by the LNER just to basic body shape, and then into the BR period as well. Of course, we've got internal user use with the National Coal Board, with the British Sugar Corporation. So as an overall project, there's a lot we can do. There are different body styles, there are different brakes, there are different legends within that. So, you know, it's a nice big project for us to get our teeth into. So with no surviving P6, P8 or Q3 hoppers left in existence, we're here at Beamish to look at the P7 that we surveyed during the course of research on this particular wagon. I brought along the engineering prototype here so that we can run through the details and just point out some relevant points for you. So we've got in-mounted handbrakes, which we've faithfully replicated on the EP. Steps vary across all types, so the corner steps, sometimes it's 2 at one end, sometimes 1 at each corner, sometimes 1 on opposing corners, and this has all been taken into account. Buffers change, but not that often, so what we have is an NER pattern with a step set into the top of it, and that again has been replicated. Journals and W1s vary between types. A number of journals were used in the construction of these. Inside and outside W frames were done. Brakes vary from one side only to 8 clasp to M mounted. And again, we've incorporated this into our tooling suite. The body side tends to stay the same across most of the wagons. Some subtle changes occur during LNER ownership of these wagons as they were modified to better suit the way that the LNER worked. And where this has occurred, we've taken this into account. As we look here, again, handrails vary position and this has been taken into account. All in all, we have replicated the suite for these hoppers as best we can, to the best of our knowledge, to the best of the North East Railway Association's knowledge, because we've worked very closely with both them and with Beamish to make sure that we get all the relevant details needed. So when I first came to measure this particular wagon, it was in slightly better condition than it is now, having survived a few more winters. But I wanted to show you how much of the internal detail we've actually been at pains to replicate. So I thought the best way for us to do that is to get the drone up in the air. So on the inside of the wagon, what we have is a partition separating out the two parts, a sloping interior with the hopper doors sitting in there. So the idea being the coal feeds out through the hopper doors under gravity. So what we've done is we've covered this with the planking and with the hinges inside. And this is set on a die-cast chassis. So one of the interesting points about these wagons is how certain aspects of them were altered through their time from the NER to the LNER. And the end stanchions here are quite a good indication. So you notice on this particular P7, the stanchion starts at the top, works down, drops below buffer height. And this is so that it can buffer up to things like the Chaldrons with their dropped or dumb buffers. Now, as time goes on, the NER banned the use of dumb buffers. So what happens, like on this wagon, which isn't one that we're actually modelling at the moment, but the stanchions are sawn off flat. And that's another element that we've incorporated into the tooling. So that covers the NER period. So when we get to the LNER, they decide to do something slightly different. So during the course of upgrades and repairs, what the LNER did was to fit angle iron instead of the wooden stanchions. These finish flush at the bottom, and again, it's another element of our model that we've taken great pains to replicate properly. So having brought 9 engineering samples along, I thought the best way of showing you was to place them here on the platform side at Rowley Station at Beamish. I could run through each one, but this is basically a summary of the tooling variations that we brought in. So each one of these 9 EPs shows a different tooling, so it would be different brakes or the different stanchions or the different parts of the end body that have changed. Now, if we run through them just from beginning to end and just pick out some samples, it might help you to better understand what we've spent our time working on. So at the beginning, we've got the P6 wagon. As I said, this was a 2/3 height hopper that was done as a prototype. 1,200 prototypes is not bad, and these were introduced from the beginning of the 20th century. So these were the types that came in 1902. Very quickly, it moved on to the P7s. Now, we spent some time talking about the P7s over there with 46153. But the models show the different variations, and that takes the timeline through the various NER changes that were done, through the LNER changes, and even into the BR period, where these were running behind steam on the main line, right up until about 1950 probably. It's difficult to pick them out any later than that, and I'm sure there's 1 or 2 examples that were running about. But if we take 1950 as the point where they were sold on into internal use, and what we've got is we've got the end handbrakes, we've got the different stanchions, the different journals that were used, and we have to make these up and build them, the assemblies, prior to them being done by the factory, so the factory knows how many of each example are being produced. We then come through to the P8, a couple of versions of the P8, and the P8 was the 23-ton version of the hopper. Friction brakes were used on these, and it was a way of getting heavier trains to start off easier. Wasn't entirely successful, and so what you find is the P8 was downgraded to a 20-ton hopper, and then for those purposes it was referred to as a P7. So there's subtle differences there in the tooling. And the final one we come to is the Q3. Now the Q3 is a 20-ton hopper with side doors cut into it for use in locomotive coal. So these would have run through to various depots filled with coal for the locomotives, and there they would have been unloaded. Side doors there because obviously they've got to be manually unloaded at the depots, and particularly nice because under the NER they were painted bright blue with red crosses to warn staff that there was an awful lot of weight behind those doors, and if they didn't take care they'd end up likely crushed beneath the coal. So, big question, how many are we producing, how much are they going to cost, and when are they going to come? So we're going to be producing 9 packs of 3 wagons in the first batch of these. Each wagon pack of 3 will be $84.95, and we're looking for them to be arriving with ourselves and our retailers in Q1 2024. Okay, so that's the NER 20 tonners. Shall we go have a look at what we're going to do next?